Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet. This is the third take of this particular recording. I've recorded a take every day for the past 3 days, so hopefully this will be the final take. You may not remember this. You might be a new listener to this podcast. You might have just perused the podcast on a periodic basis. But there was a time when I was thinking of having a miniature company, and I'd forgotten that I'd commissioned any artwork associated with this, but obviously a substantial portion of the intellectual property of the miniature company was going to be through artwork and actual miniature design. So I recently, literally in the past 10 minutes, have stumbled across some of this artwork, which I'd forgotten I'd ever commissioned to do. And I'd commissioned it around a particular game. Now, I've narrated in the past the Britannia rule system, and I lamented when I recorded this podcast yesterday that I couldn't actually put my hands on the Britannia rule system currently, but it exists somewhere in my library, which is just the nature of having an expansive library. While it covers 2 walls, it's about 20 feet by, I don't know. It covers 2 walls. Somewhere in there, the Britannia rule system is. I'm not really in a rush to find it currently. However, the Dragon Warriors rule system is probably the closest thing to Britannia that was ever released commercially by a fellow called Dave Morrison. And the Britannia rule system was heavily influenced by Dragon Warriors, sufficient that I think by having Dragon Warriors alone, I'll be able to do some degree of recreation. Now, what I'd forgotten was that I'd actually I had written a new rule system based on the Britannia rule system, which I hadn't touched for, according to my dates on particular files, 2019. Can we take our minds back to 2019, back when the Postal Service worked and a bunch of other things happened? It was a very surreal time for me because I was actually seriously contemplating creating a miniature company, and part of that, as acknowledged already in this podcast, was drawings, lots and lots of artwork. So I've delved into this artwork and realized that even if the rule system doesn't contain the artwork is my motivation enough to continue the rule system. You may wonder, because you've listened to this podcast recently, what happened to Chainer? What happened to the Mushroom Boy? Well, I started working on both those things, and I came to the conclusion that both were not really the place that I wanted to be at the end of the year in 2022. The Mushroom Boy is a relatively dark story, which is built in a large part on my own experiences. Even though I never did anything like the Mushroom Boy did, the experiences that led up to the creation of the Mushroom Boy, and even experiences following the Mushroom Boy, that's what's really curious, is that this is a text that was, I guess, created really in 1994 through to 1996. And the experiences I had through this period of time really framed what Mushroom Boy was. And then I ended up writing my urban simulation in 1997, which is what puts all the time frames together. So when I was writing the Mushroom Boy, or rewriting or starting or getting together for a game, which is what I've been doing over the past 2 weeks, I had to revisit times in my life that I didn't particularly want to revisit. And Chainer's even more like that, because basically the only real documentation of the first Chechen wars is associated with jihadists, and I don't really have much interest in jihadi folk, and I don't really have much interest in that narrative, because the actual narrative, which I found when I read earlier books associated with the first Chechen wars, was that there was an organized crime component, and that's what paid for all the weapons to come out of the former Soviet Union military caches and into the hands of these, whatever they are, the opponents to the Russian invading force in Chechnya. So that was a mindset that I didn't want to particularly be in for the end of the year. Maybe in the future. I have thought a little bit about the Second World War proposition that I make in the Just Plain Chaos rule system, justplainchaos.com. You can download the rules and actually read my analysis associated with why there won't be a Second World War version of Just Plain Chaos anytime soon. Well, I started to feel that way with regards to this first Chechen wars. That really it was too confronting and it's just not the mindset I wanted to be in. So I went back to this Post-Britannia rule system, which I've never actually announced the name of the Post-Britannia rule system in this podcast because, I don't know, it just didn't seem to jive with whatever I was thinking about at the time. The game is called Filthy, and it's a joke based on Monty Python, what is it, the Holy Grail, where the peasants are just digging in the dirt and they say, well, we're just filthy as filth, which I don't actually think probably happened. It's just my memory of the Monty Python element of the Holy Grail. And yes, it's a Dark Age role-playing game, which is set in from about 500 to about 1000 AD. I tightened that a bit to about 700 to 1000 AD. It'll exist somewhere in there. And the real interest that I have currently in the Filthy rule system is the fact that I wrote a good portion of it. and had completely forgotten about it. I just recently rediscovered it. Like, when I say recently, within the past half hour. So I thought, well, this is the perfect time to record the third attempt of this particular podcast. Talk about a couple of other things. The lead pile hopefully will be ending in terms of the painting of the lead pile by February. It's a kind of commitment I've given to my wife. My wife thinks I should invest my time in radio-controlled planes. She says they're cheaper, and quite frankly, if they crash frequently, they crash frequently, and that at least disposes of the radio-controlled planes. I don't know what my relationship will be with miniatures when the lead pile painting completes. I think I still have them, obviously. There's a physical volume associated with them. With regards to Chechnya specifically, there's a case, a small case, that contains Chechen and Russian figures painted. I've ordered a BTR-80, I think, which fits in with the Chechen conflict because that's the all-terrain vehicle that the Russians came across, and I think they're still using them. In the Ukrainian conflict, I remember reading somewhere that the Russians were still using those 1980 circa personnel carriers. So maybe that's a prototype in the current Russian conflict as well. Not that I'm looking to muddle the current Russian conflict, or in the near term, the Chechen conflict. I think I'll return to Chechnya at some stage in the future. But Filthy has just gotten me reinvigorated in terms of the fact that I'd already written a couple of pages of additions and have just added them to the existing rule system, and I really was working on this thing as a functioning thing. It's very strange to return to something in your past as being new and fresh and completely forgotten about, but that unfortunately is the nature of the whole COVID period, pre-actually having COVID. Was just there was a lot of transition, a lot of nonsense going on, and I guess I forgot some of the fun stuff through dealing with the nonsense, like the postal system, for example. So that's an interesting point. Will I return to this in future discussions? I think it's going to be what my rules a bit is about in the foreseeable future, with the view that the Mushroom Boy in China, maybe sometime in the medium-term future. But writing is just such a difficult thing currently. I mean, I got out the Just Plain Chaos rule system really through kind of obsessive crunching on the problem. And the Filthy rule system needs a bit more than obsessive crunching, I think. We'll need to work out how that fits together. The first thing I'm going to do is probably actually print out the rules as they exist to date, to actually have a physical copy of the rules to go through again. Because looking at it in the word processing documents, we're like, wow, I wrote all of this at some stage. Which I think is just the nature of My Rules Are Better as a podcasting form is, gee, I wrote all of this at some stage. So thank you very much for tuning into this rather scattershot podcast. I think I covered most of the stuff that I wanted to cover, which was covered in the 2 prior recordings that never got published. It is becoming a bit of a phenomenon with this podcast that I record multiple occasions and then finally get one out. So Tom Barbalet in Las Vegas, Nevada, signing out. May I wish you all a happy Christmas and a happy New Year as well. I'm going to do it relatively minor here. We're going to a Chinese restaurant to maybe reference some of my Ashkenazi past, but I do wish you all a happy Christmas and a happy New Year, and more in 2023, no doubt.